Shadows of the past. Edward Cole was not a man of impulsiveness, yet as he stepped out one crisp autumn morning into the bustling streets of Manhattan, he felt the weight of time and destiny pressing together upon his shoulders. At 78, Edward had seen more than most his age could imagine, decades of calm routine, punctuated by fleeting moments of wild hope. That morning, however, was destined to be different. The city, with its swirling energy of honking taxis, chattering pedestrians, and billboards declaring the future, served as an unlikely starting point for the adventure that would rekindle his long-buried spirit. Edward's journey began when he received a mysterious letter from an old friend, Thomas Archer, inviting him to a reunion in Boston. The note contained not only nostalgic sentiments but also subtle hints of danger, a reference to sudden disappearances, chaotic conflicts, and a disturbance in the natural order that even the metropolis could not ignore. As Edward boarded his train, he recounted memories of his youth in Vermont and the rugged mountain paths he had once trodden. His mind raced with images of risk and reconciliation, and though fear gripped him, an underlying thirst for living vibrantly stirred his tired soul. The train ride up the East Coast was a microcosm of life itself, a flowing tapestry of diverse people, each with a story that intersected briefly with his own. There was Maria Santos, a warm-hearted nurse returning home after a successful mission in Latin America, Jonathan Burke, a young journalist with a habit of scribbling hurried notes in a battered notebook, and a soft-spoken gentleman named Leonard Price, whose eyes betrayed secrets of lost love. In the gentle murmur of train conversations, Edward could almost forget the ominous warnings within Thomas Archer's letter. Hours later, in the dim twilight of early evening, the train pulled into South Station in Boston. Edward disembarked and was immediately struck by how the city's historical facades and modern skyscrapers intermingled in a vibrant mosaic of time. The crisp air was unusually heavy, as if history itself was whispering urgent messages. With his cane tapping and his heart steadying, Edward navigated the crowded streets. Every face, every street corner reminded him of countless tales from his past, a past full of both beauty and sorrow. Outside a modest hotel near the bustling Quincy Market, Edward was met by a man with a weathered face and resolute eyes. "Edward, it's been far too long," the man said, extending a calloused hand. Thomas Archer, his old friend, had aged gracefully in his own rugged manner. "I was beginning to wonder if you would ever answer the call of our shared history. Thomas, you always had a way of making a reunion sound like a summons to destiny," Edward replied with a wry smile, his voice soft yet resonant with emotion. As the two old friends walked through the illuminated streets of Boston, Thomas filled Edward in on the unsettling disturbances that had gripped the region over the past few months. Sporadic reports of violence, looting, and inexplicable disappearances along the outskirts of the city had caused local authorities to reel. Amid these stories, one detail recurred: survivors spoke of a hidden refuge in the verdant hills of New Hampshire, where an eclectic group had come together seeking hope and safety. Thomas believed that within this refuge, answers to the unsettling events might be hidden, and perhaps, hope for a new beginning. Over steaming bowls of clam chowder at a venerable local diner near Boston Common, Edward and Thomas debated the merits of embarking on an impromptu expedition to New Hampshire. "I've grown accustomed to my routines, Thomas," Edward confessed between bites, his voice trembling with both trepidation and longing for meaning. "But something tells me that this is the moment when we must defy our limitations." "I understand your hesitation, Edward," Thomas reassured, his eyes softening as he regarded his friend. "But life is unpredictable. The extraordinary often waits just outside the borders of our comfort zone. And if we don't take this chance, we might forever wonder what paths might have unfurled before us." That night, Edward found no sleep in his modest hotel room. Instead, memories and doubts swirled together like the autumn leaves outside his window. He thought about the days when he was a young man trekking the Appalachian trails, facing the caprices of the wilderness with relentless curiosity and an unquenchable thirst for life. The prospect of facing harsh realities again, the survival struggles, the very real conflict between desperate communities and disconnected institutions, sparked both fear and a rekindled flicker of youthful determination. Early the next morning, Edward stepped out into a world that seemed both familiar and strange. Boston was already stirring with the hum of commuter traffic and the murmurs of people discussing political unrest and environmental calamities. Thomas had already prepared a small travel pack filled with essentials: a few hand-carved tools, canned goods, a weathered map showing the routes through hidden forest trails, and even a battered photograph of the two friends in younger days. As Edward slung his own bag over his frail shoulder and adjusted his cap, he said, "Let's see if fate can still surprise us, old friend." Their journey northbound took them from the frenetic urban life into rustic backroads and serene countryside. They drove along highways and then abandoned roads, soon leaving behind the towering skyline in favor of sprawling trees, or winding paths alongside glistening lakes. In a small town in New Hampshire, they encountered a ragtag band of survivors who had established a makeshift community in an abandoned mill. Its inhabitants were as diverse as the landscapes they had come from: an intrepid female scientist named Clara Mitchell, a retired military strategist known as Samuel Reed, and even a young couple, Caroline and Dylan Brooks, who had fled from chaos in their hometown. The survivors took the newcomers in cautiously. Over a communal fire one evening, as the scent of burning wood curled into the cold night air, Samuel addressed the circle. "Friends, the world outside is becoming less forgiving by the day. Whether it's a natural calamity or man-made chaos, we must be ready to fight for our lives and for the hope of rebuilding." His voice was steady, holding both authority and compassion. Edward listened intently, his memories of military training and wilderness survival surfacing gradually. "I may be old," he mused aloud, "but even old dogs can learn new tricks." His remark drew a warm laugh from Clara, who responded, "You may be our secret weapon, Edward. Sometimes, wisdom and experience can outmatch brute force." The next few days blurred together in a haze of planning, scouting journeys, and moments of introspection. Under Samuel's guidance, the community began to coordinate a defensive strategy for the refuge. With reports coming in from neighboring areas of violent clashes between desperate citizens and unscrupulous gangs, everyone understood that survival was not solely a matter of foraging or hiding, it was also about defending one's values and bonds. Edward, whose heart had known sorrow from the loss of his beloved wife and the betrayal of long-lost friends, found in this struggle a new purpose. One cool morning, as fog crept lazily over a dew-drenched field outside the camp, Caroline approached Edward quietly while he examined an old compass on a battered table. "Mr. Cole," she began softly, "you seem to hold a secret part of history within you. Might you share some of your experiences with us? It could help us understand how to face these challenges." Edward smiled gently, settling himself into a creaky wooden chair. "In time," he said, his voice laced with both gravity and wistfulness, "I will tell you about how the world was once different, about the days when trust and honor were considered treasures. And how, through struggle, we learned to see beauty in perseverance." Over the next several afternoons, Edward's recollections wove into the fabric of the group's everyday life. In these shared moments, he recounted the times he spent traversing the Appalachian Mountains during his youth, describing how a simple walk through the forest had once been a pilgrimage of renewal. He told of winters spent enduring bitter cold, of nights illuminated by starlight and the soft murmur of companions telling tales by the campfire. His words gave courage to those who felt overwhelmed by the uncertainties of their times. One particularly tense day, while a heavy rain battered the refuge, the community's fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a group of armed looters. The hostile invaders were led by a scar-faced man named Victor Harmon, whose ruthless ambition was only matched by his brutality. Victor had learned that the small settlement harbored supplies and a hope that threatened to inspire resistance. He demanded that the survivors surrender their stores, and when his threats went unheeded by Samuel and his colleagues, he ignited a confrontation that would test everyone's mettle. The first sign of conflict came in the form of shattered glass and panicked shouts. Edward, who had been quietly mending some equipment in a corner of the community hall, heard the ruckus and hurried outside with his old walking stick in hand. "We must not let them take what is rightfully ours," Samuel commanded as he directed makeshift barricades around the entrance of the mill. Amid torrential rain and the bitter wind, the two groups clashed. The looters, emboldened by their numbers, surged forward with a mixture of cruelty and desperation. Edward found himself back in the thick of action, driven by a steadfast will to protect his newfound family. His voice rang out as he helped guide younger men and women to safety while simultaneously using his experience to confront the invaders with a cool determination that belied his age. "Now, listen here!" Edward bellowed, his voice echoing over the pounding rain. "We may be few, but we have something you lack: a commitment to one another. This is our home, and as long as one of us stands, you will not have it." His rallying cry, unusual for someone so advanced in years, stirred the embers of courage in the hearts of his allies. The battle raged for what seemed like hours. Thunder crashed overhead as makeshift weapons clashed with brutal force. In one heart-stopping moment, Edward found himself face to face with one of Victor's henchmen. The man sneered, raising his crude club, but Edward, summoning a reservoir of resolve from decades of hardship, deflected the blow with a swift, precise movement. The ensuing struggle was not without injury, but every bruise and cut was a testament to the unwavering determination that had defined Edward's life. As the rain subsided and the fog of conflict began to lift, the invaders retreated, leaving behind wounded bodies and a community united by their shared ordeal. In the aftermath, as medics tended to the injured and survivors reassured one another, Thomas placed a supportive hand on Edward's shoulder. "You did something remarkable today, Edward. You reminded all of us what it means to hold fast in the face of adversity." With the threat temporarily held at bay, the group spent several days fortifying their refuge. Edward devoted his time to teaching the younger survivors basic survival tactics, lessons drawn from a lifetime of experience. In adversity, he explained during one such impromptu lesson under a grey autumn sky, it is not strength in numbers that saves you, but the strength of each individual's spirit. Never forget that hope is born in the most unlikely of places. Conversations blended with the quiet determination that seemed to settle over the camp like a protective cloak. At night, under a canopy of stars in the rural hills of New Hampshire, the survivors sat around a crackling fire, sharing stories and forging bonds that transcended age and circumstance. Clara, who had once dedicated her life to scientific inquiry, remarked softly, "It is remarkable how life has a way of reassembling itself from the fragments of loss. Every wound, every scar tells a story of resilience." In these moments, Edward often found his thoughts drifting back to memories of his wife, Eleanor, whose gentle smile and unwavering kindness had defined so many of his happier days. The pain of loss was irreplaceable, yet in the compassion exhibited by these survivors, he saw echoes of her spirit. At one point, during a quiet conversation with Samuel Reed, Edward confided, "Sometimes I feel that every hardship is a tapestry woven by fate, and every challenge is a chance to honor those who came before us." Eleanor believed that our lives are intertwined by destiny. Samuel, whose life had been dedicated to discipline and order, replied, "I've learned that survival isn't merely about the body, but about the heart and soul. And you, Edward, have the heart of a warrior and the soul of a poet." As the refuge slowly rebuilt its boundaries and its spirit of independence, news of more aggressive unrest began to filter in from urban centers along the Northeast Corridor. Large cities like New York and Philadelphia were experiencing unprecedented upheavals, protests turning violent, infrastructure failing under the strain of continuous conflict, and an omnipresent fear of further degradation of civil order. The delicate balance in the wilderness camp was gradually tested by these far-reaching tremors. One early morning, as fog fanned the landscape into surreal hues of silver and blue, Caroline sat beside Edward on a wooden bench near the periphery of the camp. "Do you ever wonder," she asked hesitantly, "if this calamity is nature's way of forcing us to return to basics, to remember what truly matters?" Edward regarded her thoughtfully. "I have come to believe," he responded, "that in moments of crisis, we rediscover aspects of ourselves we had long forgotten. Perhaps, like the phoenix rising from ashes, we must let go of our preconceived notions of safety to embrace a purer form of existence. In the following weeks, the tension beyond the safe haven of the refuge heightened. Rumors of mercenary bands and government crackdowns reached even the secluded hills of New Hampshire. Despite the continuous strain, the survivors united in their determination to build a semblance of normalcy amid chaos. They repaired buildings, cleared debris from overgrown fields, and established communication networks using ham radios salvaged from abandoned supply depots. Every day presented new challenges, but also new opportunities to reinvent hope. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down relentlessly on the forest canopy, Edward accompanied a small group on an expedition to secure additional medical supplies from a derelict hospital near Concord, Massachusetts. The remnants of the hospital, cloaked in ivy and neglect, were intertwined with memories of lives once touched by healing. With every cautious step, Edward reminded his companions, "Be mindful, even when forgotten by time, these places hold secrets. Respect them." The journey was rife with danger. Along a narrow, crumbling alleyway behind the hospital, the party encountered a gang of scavengers led by a young but hardened man named Marcus Finley. Marcus eyed the intruders suspiciously, his hand hovering near the pistol tucked in his jacket. "What brings you here?" he demanded in a low, urgent tone. Thomas, who had accompanied Edward on this particular mission, responded calmly, "We seek an array of medicine. Our community is failing, and we must care for our own before darkness engulfs us entirely." The tension in the narrow corridor felt palpable. After a prolonged silence, Marcus's eyes softened as he considered their plea. "There is danger here, but if you show respect for the place, I can let you pass. The hospital demands that you honor its survivors," he warned, his tone a mixture of threat and begrudging empathy. That encounter marked a turning point. Over the following days, Edward and his companions managed to retrieve a vital cache of supplies. The success, however, came at the cost of a bitter reminder: survival in a world unmoored from conventional order required constant vigilance and trust, a trust that was as fragile as the ancient walls of the abandoned hospital. When Edward returned to the refuge that evening, a sense of quiet triumph mixed with somber reflection enveloped him. Around the communal fire, voices mingled in gratitude and reflection. Every day, Edward confided to the attentive circle of survivors, teaches us that even in the midst of tempestuous storms, the human spirit can find form and beauty. We must never let despair rob us of that inherent strength. In the weeks that followed, the community evolved into a self-sustaining refuge, its members learning to balance between defending their hard-won sanctuary and nurturing the fragile seeds of civilization. Conversations that once revolved solely around survival soon delved into dreams of rebuilding, fostering a social fabric intertwined with art, music, and shared reminiscences of better times. Edward took on the role of an elder, dispensing advice drawn from a lifetime of existence, a living bridge between a world lost and a future emerging. There were moments of levity, too. On one particularly memorable evening, as a light drizzle fell over the horizon, Edward found himself engaged in a playful debate with Jonathan Burke about the nature of modern technology versus the simplicity of traditional navigation techniques. "Your smartphones and digital maps might guide you through a concrete jungle," Jonathan teased, "but give me a star-filled sky and an old compass any day." Edward replied with a gentle chuckle, "Perhaps, Jonathan, that is why I always carry this faithful companion. It reminds me that even in this era of constant illumination, there remains an innate wonder in the simplicity of nature." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months as the refuge stood resilient amid a changing world. The delicate balance between survival and conflict was maintained through compromise, trust, and the unwavering spirit of a community united by adversity. Edward's presence continued to act as a beacon of wisdom and a reminder that each life, no matter how weathered by time, held the potential for renewal and transformation. One crisp morning, as the first hints of spring began to dispel the lingering chill of winter, the community decided it was time to revisit their original purpose. Under a sky washed in brilliant hues of blue and gold, Edward and his closest companions prepared for one final expedition, a journey to Boston once more, carrying not only supplies but also a message of hope and commitment to a slowly healing nation. The journey back was marked by quiet reflection and moments of camaraderie. As they traveled along highways that stretched between relics of the past and yet to be built wonders of the future, Edward engaged in heartfelt dialogues with his fellow travelers. "It is not the destination that defines us," he told Thomas one evening, as the pair sat watching the sunset over a quiet Rhode Island shore. "It is the many small acts of courage and kindness along our journey that ultimately shape our legacy." In the heart of Boston, amid the scars of recent conflict and the hopeful sprouting of urban renewal projects, the group was welcomed by a community of citizens equally determined to mend their fractured society. The city, though battered by recent turmoil, had not lost its soul. Edward walked the familiar cobbled sidewalks with a sense of bittersweet reverie, each step a reminder of the turbulent past and the promise of renewal. In a spontaneous gathering at Boston Common, citizens, survivors, and former defenders of the refuge stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing hopes and dreams. There were passionate speeches made amid heartfelt dialogues. One man, his eyes glistening with conviction, declared, "Today, we stand at the crossroads of our future. We may have been tested by the fires of conflict, but we have emerged stronger, bound by our collective will to create a better tomorrow." His words blended with gentle laughter and the soft clinking of toasting cups. Later that evening, as Edward sat on a park bench savoring the cool night air and the muted hum of the revitalized city, he recalled his own long winding path from the tranquil streets of Manhattan to these charged moments of reconstruction. The faces he had encountered, the conflicts fought, and the bonds forged each served as an enduring testament to the resilience of the human spirit. "We carry more than scars," he mused quietly to himself. "We carry the imprint of every life that has ever dared to hope." With the coming of dawn, the new day in Boston signified the dawn of a broader movement to return to community values in a world that was undergoing profound change. Edward dedicated his days to sharing his experiences with local youth, recounting his adventures in clear, measured tones that blended caution with inspiration. "Life," he explained during one memorable conversation in a sunlit courtyard near the old State House, "is an odyssey full of unexpected detours. Embrace each twist in your journey, for in every turn, there lies an opportunity to discover the truth about yourself." The months that followed were filled with reconstruction efforts, dialogues between former adversaries, and a hopeful reconciliation among communities that had once been divided by fear and uncertainty. The elderly Edward Cole became a revered figure in Boston, a living emblem of perseverance, a keeper of stories and memories that bridged the gap between a tumultuous past and an optimistic future. As spring matured into a balmy summer, the themes of survival, conflict, and ultimately reconciliation wove themselves into the daily tapestry of life both in the refuge and in the bustling city. Edward's legacy was not measured by the battles he had fought, but by the lives he had touched and the courage he had instilled in those around him. In his gentle wisdom, he often said, "We all have our stories, like threads in a grand tapestry. When woven together, even the darkest moments can form patterns of hope and renewal." And so, as the sun set on one final day of adventure, its vibrant hues melding into a night of quiet promise, Edward Cole sat surrounded by friends, companions, and those he had inspired along his long journey. The once fractured world now hummed with the quiet dedication of rebuilding, and the echoes of past struggles served as guideposts for a future that, though uncertain, was embraced with a steadfast heart. In that moment, with the cool night air caressing his weathered skin and a sense of peace settling upon him, Edward silently acknowledged that every twist of fate, every surge of conflict, had been a step along the road to renewal. This extraordinary odyssey reminded everyone present that life, however unpredictable, was rich with the potential for change. It was a journey defined not by the absence of conflict but by the strength to overcome it, not by the ease of survival, but by the courage to embrace adversity. As the community prepared for the challenges ahead, they carried with them the wisdom of an elderly man whose spirit had shone through the darkest hours, a beacon of hope and proof that even in a broken world, human resolve could kindle the possibility of a redeemed tomorrow. In reflecting on the entirety of his tumultuous, yet ultimately uplifting journey from the frenetic pulse of Manhattan, Through the historic veins of Boston, to the serene yet battle-scarred hills of New Hampshire, Edward Cole felt that his life had come full circle. His adventure was a living narrative of endurance, a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit in the face of survival and conflict. And as he gazed into the hopeful eyes of those gathered around him, he whispered quietly, "May we always remember that every scar we bear is a mark of a battle won, and every setback, a lesson in the art of living." This is a fictional tale and not based on actual events. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to my channel, like, and check the description to see how you can support my work.